What was the difference between American lions and cave lions? Lions are rightfully regarded as top-tier apex predators, thanks in no small part to their size, power, intelligence, and ability to work and hunt together. Today, we have two main groups, African lions and Asian lions. But did you know that there were other kinds of lions in prehistory? That's right, and we're here to talk about two iconic lions from the world before history, American lions and cave lions. How did the two live? When did they live? Why did they go extinct? More importantly, what were the differences between them? Well, that's what we're looking to uncover today, so sit back, relax, and let's get started. American lion. The North American plains were a heck of a place back in the late Pleistocene. Bison, mammoths, horses, and other herbivores roamed free and lived on the endless sea of grass. Of course, despite the limitless physical freedom, none of these beasts were free from fear. That's because the landscape was teeming with countless bloodthirsty predators, including bears, wolves, and large cats. When it came to large cats, they didn't get bigger or more frightening than Panthera atrox, better known as the American lion. These extinct cats were close relatives of modern lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars, which is why they are classified as Panthera cats. They were initially considered to be a subspecies of the modern lion, Panthera leo, but were eventually classified as a separate species. To further underline its status as a true panther, the American lion had a special hyoid bone that allowed it to roar. Atrox lived and ruled relatively briefly, with paleontologists estimating it lived between 130,000 and 13,000 years ago. Others argue that the American lion actually emerged 200,000 years ago. Regardless of the truth, this is still a fairly short existence, especially when compared to the saber-toothed Smilodon fatalis, which lived in North America between 1.6 million and 10,000 years ago. The word atrox is Latin, and it means cruel or fearsome, which tells you everything you need to know about this animal's nature. Today, much of the fossil evidence for this prehistoric kitty has been unearthed at California's La Brea tar pits, with nearly 100 different specimens identified. So what can we learn from these fossils? Well, in addition to helping us determine when it lived, we can also see that the American lion was enormous. The tar pits did a good job of preserving the bones, which makes it easier to see or recreate the animal's skeletal structure. And based on the knowledge of extant big cats' skeletal structures, scientists can make educated estimates about how big the American lion was, to an extent. Most estimates suggest the extinct cat was about 20 to 25% larger than modern African lions on average, which is massive. Like with other big cats, male American lions were significantly bigger than their female counterparts. Body length ranged from 5 feet 3 inches to 8 feet 2 inches without the tail. Shoulder height was around 4 feet. Weight is much more contested because it's difficult to determine musculature and muscle density. However, educated guesses based on other cats gives us estimated ranges of 518 and 1,153 pounds for males and 385 and 805 pounds for females. The upper ends of these ranges make the American lion the largest cat ever documented and an apex predator among apex predators. These giant cats lived on plains, going after large herbivores and anything else unlucky enough to get caught. They used their large claws to grab victims and their immense jaws to suffocate them or snap their necks. Naturally, their bulk and strength were also key to bringing down prey. One thing that isn't 100% certain is whether the American lion was solitary, like most wild cats, or if it lived in groups, like modern lions. However, based on modern lion behavior and the concentration of fossils at La Brea, many scientists lean toward the belief that it was a social cat. Again, based on what we know about modern lions, there's a good chance that American lions lived in groups called prides, which were made up of females, cubs, and 1 or 2 dominant males. These prides would control territories and work together to bring down massive or super fast prey using stealth and ambush techniques. The cat's immense size also suggests that cooperative hunting was its go-to strategy. Despite their impressive speed, modern lions are not as fast as cheetahs, and they lack the endurance of wolves or wild dogs. This is why they rely on hunting as a group to succeed in the unforgiving plains. That said, even in groups, lions have a fairly poor hunting success rate of about 30%, so it's easy to assume that larger, slower American lions were even more reliant on cooperation. Additionally, some of the mega herbivores on offer during the Pleistocene were often too dangerous for solo lions to tackle. Pride life would also make protecting young a little easier. Remember, while adult lions were top dogs in town, their cubs were still vulnerable to the endless cast of killers lurking around. Other lions, saber-toothed cats, wild canids, and bears were just a few of the threats to cubs. So, just how did such a massive killer die out? Well, theories abound, but none of them are completely solid. However, the main theory points to the ripple effects of human settlement. As people hunted more and more mega herbivores, large predators like Smilodon, direwolves, and the American lion were squeezed out bit by bit, while smaller predators like cougars, lynxes, gray wolves, and coyotes could find niches and adapt to the land's new bipedal rulers. The big predators could not, and eventually paid with their lives. Despite its disappearance, the American lion remains both an icon and a mystery to scientists and animal lovers as a whole. Cave lions. Cave lions are a fairly murky topic, especially when compared to the well-preserved and documented American lion. First of all, there are long-running debates on how many species of cave lion there were exactly. The best-known species is Panthera spelea, which was determined to have diverged from modern Panthera leo lions around 500,000 years ago. Panthera spelea is also known by the common name of cave lion or steppe lion. This cat lived in the late Pleistocene and went extinct 13,000 years ago. Fossil evidence of this big cat has been found throughout Eurasia and parts of northwestern North America. This strongly suggests that cave lions crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Eurasia and made it to the Americas, where they lived and eventually sired the American lion line. Another potential species is Panthera fossilis, which is hugely divisive. Though older than Spelea, fossilis is often described as a subspecies of Spelea. However, many other scientists staunchly believe that fossilis was a separate species because it was an ancestor to Spelea. When it comes to the cave lion's evolution, most paleontologists look to Africa as the point of origin. Panthera fossilis ancestors migrated into Eurasia between 1 million and 800,000 years ago, and the oldest European fossilis fossils are believed to date back 750,000 years. The arrival of these new big cats was a shock to the local ecosystems in Europe, and a bunch of interesting prehistoric creatures were wiped out as a direct or indirect result. Creatures like the saber-toothed meganterion, the European jaguar, and the giant hyena were outcompeted and went extinct, and a series of herbivores were overhunted. There was also a lot of interbreeding between different lion species and subspecies. Cave lions commonly interbred with modern leo lions, and this probably gave rise to animals like Panthera spelea intermedia. One interesting thing about these cave lions is that they got smaller with time, with fossilis fossils being significantly larger than late Pleistocene spelea fossils. There were also significant changes in skull and tooth structure over time. Panthera fossilis, or Panthera spelea fossilis if you prefer, had a body length range of 8.2 to 9.5 feet and an estimated body weight range of 880 to 1,100 pounds. These numbers are roughly on par with American lions, which means Fossilis was one of the biggest and scariest cats ever. Late Pleistocene Panthera spelea cats were almost a fifth of the size, with body lengths between 3.9 and 4.3 feet, as well as body weight ranges of 150 to 200 pounds. Obviously, this was a far cry from the American lion's gargantuan proportions. Intermediary species and subspecies of cave lions were also intermediary when it came to size, and they clearly show the gradual downshift in build. This slow shrinkage strongly suggests that conditions in Eurasia, particularly Europe, were increasingly harsh for large predators. Climate change, the arrival of humans, and the consequential impact of potential prey meant extra-large bodies became expensive to maintain, energy-wise. Smaller bodies were increasingly more efficient, but evidently cave lions did not shrink quickly enough to avoid their eventual extinction. Unfortunately, no one is certain what cave lions looked like. but we can deduce from modern lions and prehistoric art descriptions. Given their favored grassland environments, cave lions were likely light brown or tawny, though there's no way of telling if they had stripes or spots or other markings. Additionally, none of the paintings or carvings found in the Eurasian steppes show them with manes. Despite the maneless males, we can assume they were at least a little shaggier than modern lions, which live in fairly warm environments. Another thing that we don't know for sure is their sociability. On one hand, DNA evidence shows that cave lions were pretty closely related to tigers, which suggests that they too were largely solitary. However, their depictions in groups and their preference for open grasslands point at possible cooperation and coexistence. These cats were apex predators for most of their existence, and they went after a wide range of prey. Juvenile or injured mammoths, wild horses, deer, bear cubs, boar, bison, and aurochs were likely primary targets. Of course, one can't be an apex predator without other predators to compete with. Cave lions often jostled for survival in a land filled with leopards, hyenas, other lions, wolves, bears, and tigers. What was the difference between Epicyon and Amphicyon? Have you ever heard of giant creatures roaming the earth that sound like they belong in a cartoon? Meet Epicyon and Amphicyon, two real prehistoric predators with funny dog-inspired names. Epicyon even means more than a dog, and Amphicyon is often called a bear dog. But these weren't cuddly cartoon pets. They were fearsome meat eaters from millions of years ago. So what exactly set them apart? Were they just two names for the same giant wolf? Or were they very different beasts? Let's dive into the past and find out. First off, Epicyon and Amphicyon come from different families of animals. Epicyon was actually a huge member of the dog family, Canidae, that lived in North America. In contrast, Amphicyon belonged to the family Amphicyonidae, the bear dogs. Scientists call them bear dogs not because they were bears, but because they had features of both bears and dogs. So even though their names sound similar, Epicyon was a giant ancient canine, while Amphicyon was a different kind of carnivore with its own lineage. In other words, think of Epicyon as a supersized cousin of wolves, and Amphicyon as a bulky relative that looked a bit like a bear-dog hybrid. How big and scary were they? In terms of looks and size, these two giants were impressive, but one usually outmatched the other. Epicyon had a massive head and powerful bone-crushing jaws. Its skull was actually more lion-like than wolf-like, with big teeth like a hyena's for crunching bones. Epicyon haydeni, the most famous species, grew to about 8 feet long and stood about 3 feet high at the shoulder. It could weigh on the order of 220 to 374 kilograms, roughly the weight of a big bear. All this means Epicyon was possibly the largest dog, canid, ever known. Amphicyon, on the other hand, was even bigger and bulkier. Early species of Amphicyon started off fairly large, but over time they evolved into some true giants. For example, Amphicyon ingens, one of the last North American bear dogs, may have weighed around 1,100 pounds. That's about as heavy as an adult polar bear. Amphicyon had a long snout, huge canines, and a very robust build. Its body was more bear-like. Short, sturdy legs, a wide neck, and even a heavy tail. In fact, it walked flat-footed, like a bear, instead of on its toes. This plantigrade stance, plus a broad chest and strong limbs, made Amphicyon look like a mix between a grizzly and a wolf. In short, Amphicyon was generally larger and bulkier than Epicyon, looking more like a massive bear on all fours. Another difference was how they stood and moved. Epicyon shared traits with dogs and wolves. It had a flexible back, a small collarbone, and walked on its toes, digitigrade, to help it run. This made Epicyon relatively nimble for its size. Amphicyon, by contrast, was built for power. It had strong, chunky limbs and walked flat-footed. plantigrade, like a bear. Amphicyan's shoulders were mobile and its spine was flexible, helping it wrestle prey, but it didn't chase things at high speed. To picture it simply, Epicyon was more like a giant greyhound dog built for bursts of speed, while Amphicyon was a tanky bear-like hunter built for strength. Where and when did they live? These two creatures also roamed at different times and places. Epicyon lived in the late Miocene epoch, roughly 12 to 5 million years ago. Its fossils are found only in North America, from Texas and Florida to as far north as Alberta in Canada. That means Epicyon spent its days on the plains and forests of prehistoric North America, coexisting with ancient horses, camels, and the first rhinos on the continent. Amphicyon was an older player. It first appeared in the early Miocene, around 23 million years ago, and stuck around until the late Miocene, about 7 million years ago. That's earlier than Epicyon. Interestingly, Amphicyon was a world traveler. Its fossils turned up across Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. In Europe and Asia, it lived in woodlands and grasslands, where it shared space with saber-tooths, mastodons, and early deer. Some species of Amphicyon even crossed into North America over land bridges and evolved here, like Amphicyon ingens. By contrast, Epicyon seems to have stayed on the American continent. In simple terms, Amphicyon was a global predator of the Miocene, while Epicyon was a North American specialist that showed up a bit later in time. Because of this timing, Epicyon and Amphicyon only briefly overlapped. By the time Epicyon was becoming common, around 10 million years ago, many Amphicyon species had already disappeared elsewhere. So these two giants didn't really meet each other, they were separated by millions of years. Amphicyon's reign was largely over by 7 million years ago, and Epicyon was still hanging on until about 5 million years ago. What did they eat, and how did they behave? Both Epicyon and Amphicyon were meat-eaters, but their dining styles had some twists. Epicyon was a dedicated predator and scavenger. Its teeth and jaws were built for crunching bone. In fact, studies of its skull say it could chew up large bones to get at marrow. Epicyon's molars could grind meat, plant, or insects, but evidence points to a diet heavy in meat and bone, much like a hyena. Fossils show Epicyon hunted big herbivores. It likely chased down animals like ancient camels, pronghorn-like antelopes, horses, peccaries, and even baby rhinoceroses. After a kill, Epicyon would crack open thick bones with its powerful bite, just like a hyena, to eat the marrow. It may have hunted in short bursts of speed or ambushed prey, relying on strength and its group. Some scientists think it might have hunted in packs. In any case, Epicyon loved meat and was as tough as they come. Amphicyon was also a top predator, but it might have had a more varied diet. Its teeth could both slice flesh and crunch somewhat, but it likely wasn't as bone-specialized as Epicyon. Some researchers called Amphicyon a mesocarnivore, meaning it ate a mix of meat and plants. For example, tooth-wear studies suggest many Amphicyon species dined like big omnivores, part tiger, part bear. One study even compares Amphicyon major to a red fox in diet, with lots of meat, but also fruits and roots. In fact, an article reconstruction says Amphicyon probably ate prey like horses or camels, and the occasional berries or roots. Because Amphicyon was slower, it likely stalked or ambushed its prey rather than chasing it down. It may have used its strong forelimbs to wrestle animals to the ground. Some Amphicyon fossils show bite marks on fossil rhino bones, hinting it was willing to tackle big game. In short, Amphicyon was a fearsome predator that enjoyed meat, but it also might have snacked on vegetation like a bear at times. To summarize their behavior, Epicyon was all about strength and bone. Think of a hyena-wolf combo relentlessly munching on big prey. Amphicyon was like a bear-dog ambush specialist, mostly hunting meat but not shy about adding plants into the diet. Both were apex carnivores of their time, but Epicyon's jaws were more specialized for bone and pure carnivory. while Amphicyon had a broader bear-like appetite. Epicyon and Amphicyon were both giant meat-eaters of the Miocene, but they had distinct lives. Epicyon was a North American superwolf of the late Miocene with bone-crunching teeth and a slightly smaller wolf-like build. Amphicyon was an earlier globe-trotting bear dog, bigger and bulkier, with a mixed diet and a bear-like stance. They may have shared some traits, huge jaws, scary teeth, but in looks, time period, range, and eating habits, they were different beasts entirely. Now, when someone asks what's the difference between Epicyon and Amphicyon, you can say one was a jumbo North American dog and the other was a massive bear dog from the Miocene, both impressive in their own right. What is the difference between Arctodus, short-faced bear, and Arctotherium? Prehistoric times were teeming with an unknowable number of fearsome beasts, creatures that would send modern lions, tigers, and even bears running for the hills. And speaking of bears, we've got two iconic titans of the wild before time. In one corner, Arctodus, the short-faced bear, a North American nightmare that haunted woodlands and plains. In the other corner, Central and South America's apex killer and the largest bear of all time, Arctotherium. What is the story with these two monsters? What were the differences between them, and how did they stack up against modern bears? Let's look into it. Arctodus. Arctodus is actually a genus name for at least two confirmed species. The first is the North American lesser short-faced bear, aka Arctodus pristinus, and the other is the legendary North American giant short-faced bear, or Arctodus simus. Both species lived during the Pleistocene, with the lesser bear dating back to the early part of the period, and the giant species living in the late part. The larger bear is a direct descendant of the lesser, too, and they probably lived together and intermingled during the Middle Pleistocene. Now, Arctodus is part of the wider bear family, Ursidae. However, it is also in the Tremarctini subfamily, along with several other extinct genera and the living South American speckled bear, Tremarctos ornatus. This means Arctodus bears were more closely related to the spectacled bear than any other living bear species. The lesser Arctodus was restricted to the eastern parts of the modern-day United States before its disappearance 300,000 years ago. The giant one had a far larger domain, thriving in the central and western U.S., northern Mexico and western Canada, and Alaska before its and other megafauna's demise around 13,000 years ago. So what does lesser, or more interestingly, giant, mean, numbers-wise? Well, quite a bit actually. The lesser bear was very similar in size to modern-day grizzlies. With a size range of 310 to 880 pounds, they stood at about 3.5 feet at the shoulder on average and were between 6.5 and 7.8 feet long. On hind legs, they were at least 6.5 feet tall. The giant short-faced bear is the subject of much speculation, but luckily the relative abundance of fossils allows for more educated estimates. The fossils show larger skulls, longer and more robust bones, and bigger teeth than most, if not all, modern species. Shoulder height was between 3.3 and 5.5 feet, meaning the big ones could look a grown man in the face. Standing on the hind legs was from 8 to 11 feet. Its extra long limbs could add a further 3 to 4 feet of vertical enormity. Weight was about 1,370 pounds on average, which is similar to big male polar and Kodiak bears during their peak bulking periods. However, the largest giant bears were north of 2,000 pounds. Sex was a major influence on size, as males of either species were much larger than females. Male lesser short-faced bears often overlapped in size with female giant short-faced bears, which is a common cause of confusion and mistaken identity for paleontologists. Like most Tremarctini bears, the two Arctodus species had what looked to be short faces compared to modern black, brown, or ice bears, whose snouts are fairly elongated. However, this apparent lack of snout is an illusion caused by the bear's relatively deep skulls. One leading theory is that Tremarctine bears developed such boxy heads to support advanced nasal anatomy for superior sense of smell. If so, what kind of adventures did these massive bears sniff their way into during a near 2.5 million year stint on Earth? Well, probably foraging for food like bears usually do. A bunch of evidence, including teeth and even poop, indicate that much of their diet was, in fact, plant-based. Despite massive canine teeth, dental wear and tear found on many fossils support the generally accepted omnivore theory. Incisor wear and carbohydrate-caused cavities are the major signs that these beasts usually partook in grasses, leaves, berries, roots, and shoots like most bears in North America. That said, carnivorism was always an option too, especially when convenience allowed. Opportunistic predation is still a hallmark trait in many bears, including the spectacled bear. And given the size of Arctodus bears, they probably had a wide range of opportunities in prehistoric North America. Herbivores like deer, pigs, and sheep were likely common victims. Then there were also horses, mastodons, and mammoths that had vulnerable young that the bears loved to pick off. Outside of hunting for themselves, Arctodus bears were most certainly scavengers. With keen noses, they could pick up the scent of dead or dying creatures from miles away and track them down. Of course, many other meat lovers were running around at the time, and this competition may have been a key reason behind the bear's eventual demise. However, in one-on-one encounters, few animals would have been bold enough to challenge, let alone intimidate, Arctodus. So the bears may have profited greatly off the hard work of rivals like wolves, cougars, American lions, saber-toothed cats, and other bears by bullying them away from their kills. Like all bears, Arctodus species were most likely solitary most of their adult lives, only coming together to breed and maybe share sizable foraging grounds. Of course, mothers and cubs would spend the longest stretches of time together, as bears often stay with their mothers for at least 2 years. Adult males were more territorial, and therefore intolerant of other males or cubs sired by other males. Arctodus bears also lived alongside the early North American humans, and conflict was a certainty. Remains of bears and artifacts from cultures like the Clovis people show that humans hunted the giant short-faced bears, lived off their meat, and used their skins and bones to fashion blankets, tools, and ornaments. Humans may have been another major contributor to the bear's extinction. Not only were human hunters a threat to these slow reproducers, but they were a direct competitor for both meat and plant-based foods too. Also, following the onset of climate change, which negatively impacted plant nutrition and availability of large prey, smaller black and brown bears were far better suited to survive the end of the Pleistocene. Arctotherium. Arctotherium was also a genus of bears from the Tremarctini subfamily. Unlike Arctodus, Arctotherium bears lived in Central and South America. There were at least 5 species that lived during the genus run from 2.5 million to 10,000 years ago. The oldest of them all, Arctotherium angustidens, is also comfortably the largest species of bear ever discovered. The other 4 species, Bonariense, Wingay, Ventustum, and Tarangense, were smaller and more in line with brown, black, and speckled bears. Like all Tremarctines, the Arctotherium bears trace their genealogy to a common ancestor known as Pleonarctus. Pleonarctus lived in North America between 10 and 3 million years ago. Arctotherium's oldest fossil is a tooth that dates back 2.5 million years from El Salvador. The oldest remains discovered in South America are of angustidens, dating back 1 million years. The history of this particular line of bears before they settled in South America is murky at best. Angustidens, now better known as the giant South American short-faced bear, was a behemoth that stood anywhere between 11 and 14 feet on its hind legs and nearly 6 feet at the shoulder when on all fours. Weight was between 2,100 and 3,800 pounds, but some more adventurous estimates say they could reach the bear's share of 5,000 pounds. The bones also suggest that this bear was thicker and more robust than the more lanky Arctodus bears of the north, the largest bear on record, and possibly the largest carnivorous mammal to ever walk the earth. The polar bear, today's mammalian killer-in-chief, is about half to 2/3 of the size of the prehistoric giant. Arctotherium angustidens went extinct around 700,000 years ago, and was replaced by smaller Arctotherium species. Wingay, the smallest, was also the most widespread across South America. It was between 100 and 300 pounds. Vetustum was between 220 and 660 pounds, while Taragensi ranged from 300 to 900 pounds. The second largest Arctotherium species was Bonariense, which had an estimated weight range of 370 and 1,100 pounds. These numbers mean that the largest males of Bonariense and Taragensi were fairly close to the giant Augustidens females. They lived in the jungles, swamps, grasslands, and scattered woodlands of the South American wilds, looking for opportunities to feed their insatiable appetites. Dental evidence shows that Arctotherium was more of an active meat-eater and predator than Arctodus. Damage to canine teeth, including harsh wear, chipping, and breaking, is far more common in this group of bears, despite them having been around at pretty much the same time as Arctodus. Large herbivorous animals were the primary preference, and in South America, this menu would have featured tapirs, elephant-like gomphotheres, ground sloths, and primates. Using their immense limbs and powerful jaws, the large Arctotherium species would wrestle, claw, and maim prey to death. Smaller Arctotherium species may also have lived on insects, birds, eggs, reptiles, and frogs. Given the abundance of aquatic environments in South America, it's safe to say that fish, turtles, crabs, and perhaps even dolphins were part of the bears' diets. With their blocky skulls, Arctotherium bears would have had tremendous bite force to breach most prey defenses and crush bones, shells, and tough scales. Large species like Augustidens and Bonariense were apex predators, along with animals like the giant jaguars and the infamous Smilodon populator saber-toothed. The big bears could hunt larger prey, which was a massive advantage at the height of the mega-herbivore era. Smaller species like Wingay were highly predatory as well, but had to watch their backs for cats, wolves, and cannibalistic bears. The smaller Arctotherium species also show evidence of a greater proportion of fruits and leaves in their diet, shown through less violent wear and tear than in Augustidens or Bonariense. The Arctotherium bears died out around 10,000 years ago, though some debated fossils may be more recent. Arctotherium wingay was likely the last of the genus, as climate change tipped the scales against the meat-dependent bears in favor of the more versatile spectacled bear we have today.
What is the difference between Basilosaurus and Mosasaurus? Prehistory is loaded with all sorts of wondrous and mysterious sea creatures, including mollusks, fish, sharks, whales, and even reptiles. Our focus today is on two extinct sea sauruses that lived during and after the time of the dinosaurs, Mosasaurus and Basilosaurus. How do these animals compare? Are they related? Did they live alongside each other? And, generally, what are the differences between them? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out, so join us as we visit the saltwater realms of millions of years ago. Mosasaurus. First of all, it's important to distinguish between Mosasaurus, the subject of this video, and Mosasaur. A mosasaur is any animal from the reptilian clade Mosasauria, which is in turn home to several families, genera, and species. The clade falls under the Squamata order alongside lizards and snakes. Meanwhile, Mosasaurus is a genus of mosasaurs. Basically, every Mosasaurus is a mosasaur, but not every mosasaur is a Mosasaurus. The Mosasaurus genus contains at least 5 confirmed species, and 4 more species are still being debated. This group of mosasaurs lived during the Campanian and Maastrichtian ages of the Cretaceous period, which is a time range of about 83 to 66 million years ago. The genus, along with other mosasaur groups, died out because of the Great Extinction event that marked the end of the Cretaceous and the dinosaurs. Their squamate physiology is evident in their strong resemblance to monitor lizards, though the Mosasauruses sported 4 flippers instead of legs, and they had a sleeker profile for easier movement in the water. They were fully aquatic and had an elongated tail that was dual-lobed and provided propulsion. The swimming style was similar to that of a mackerel, with the flippers used for steering. The first documented fossil finds were skulls found in a quarry in the Dutch town of Maastricht in the 18th century. Initially believed to belong to crocodiles or whales, the skulls were later classified to belong to marine lizards. The word Mosasaurus came as a result of the fossil's proximity to the Meuse River. Mosa is Greek for Meuse, and saurus means lizard. Based on the fossil evidence, the lizards of the Meuse were pretty large creatures. The largest species in the genus was Mosasaurus hoffmanii, a beast that had an estimated body length range of 39 to 58 feet, which would make it among the largest marine reptiles ever. There are generally two schools of thought behind the estimation of this creature's body length. Many scientists use a 1 to 10 ratio, which means the animal's total length is 10 times the length of its skull. Others use a 1 to 7 skull to body length ratio, which yields the lower estimates. Luckily, smaller species like Mosasaurus missouriensis and Mosasaurus lemanieri have more complete fossil finds. The former measured between 26 and 30 feet in length, while the latter had an estimated range of 23 to 33 feet. The Mosasaurus skull is conical, with a short snout that was blunt or pointed, depending on the specific species. The pointy, slightly curved teeth are a deadly giveaway of this creature's brutal carnivorism. These mean-looking chompers are made for slicing and cutting. Species like hoffmanii and missouriensis have serrated teeth that are thicker and more robust than those of other species, which lack serrations. All species had 4 types of teeth: premaxillaries, maxillaries, pterygoid teeth on the top jaw, and the dentary teeth on the bottom jaw. These teeth were the perfect tools for the Mosasaurus species' highly opportunistic hunting and scavenging style. They ate pretty much anything they could catch and fit in their mouths, and the larger species were apex predators. Typical diet in the ocean would have included fish, cephalopods, sharks, primitive whales, and marine reptiles like turtles, plesiosaurs, and even smaller mosasaurs. Any dead land animal that found itself in the depths was also ripe for scavenging. According to fossil deposits, Mosasauruses generally favored coastal waters over the open ocean. The Maastrichtian sites where hoffmanii were first discovered were around 130 to 160 feet underwater during the late Cretaceous. And of course, the Mosasauruses were not the only big predators under the waves in those days. In addition to large plesiosaurs, there were other sizable mosasaur groups and species lurking. 2 noteworthy examples are the prognathodon and the tylosaurines. There was the 40-foot-long Tylosaurus bernardi and the similarly sized Prognathodon saturator, both of which were apex predators and direct threats to small mosasauruses, as well as competition for many food items. While the ocean was big enough to sustain these behemoths, direct confrontations were pretty much inevitable. One Mosasaurus hoffmanii skull has major fractures that indicate a huge blow from a massive animal. Debates have been raging for years, but the general consensus is that it was a result of ramming from a large Tylosaurus. Today, the Mosasaurus is a star attraction at the Maastricht Natural History Museum. Additionally, it is arguably the most famous of the oceanic dinosaurs, thanks to its jaw-dropping appearance in the Jurassic World movie. Basilosaurus. The Basilosaurus is a classic example of a taxonomic misnomer, because Basilosaurus is Greek for king lizard, which is a pretty cool name to be fair. The only problem is that the Basilosaurus was not a lizard. It wasn't even a reptile at all. It was actually a primitive genus of whales, which makes it a mammal, not a reptile like the mosasaur. Of course, the people who discovered it didn't realize that until well after the king lizard moniker had stuck and became impossible to change. To be fair, to the 19th century scientists, Basilosaurus was the first such ancient whale find, and it was a find that was made at a time when the paleontological world was in a frenzy for marine dinosaur fossils. Doubtless, superficial similarities with highly sought-after mosasaur fossils influenced these taxonomists to jump the proverbial gun. There were 2 confirmed species, Basilosaurus setoides and Basilosaurus isis. Fossils of the former were dug up in the southeastern regions of the U.S., while the latter's remains have been discovered in Jordan and North Africa. Scientists often refer to Basilosaurus as an Archaeocete whale, which means it was evolutionarily closer to the amphibious ancestors of modern whales. These animals lived during the Bartonian and Preebonian ages of the Eocene period which is about 41 to 34 million years ago. This means they never lived alongside or tussled with Mosasaurus, and were instead among the immense ocean predators that would eventually fill the void following the end of the dinosaur dominance. They were certainly among the biggest animals around during their time, and it wouldn't be until 15 million years ago that modern whales took over as the largest creatures on the planet. Basilosaurus setoides was the longer of the two species, with a body length of 56 to 66 feet, while Basilosaurus isis was between 49 and 59 feet. Like with many dead animals without reliable living reference points, weight estimates can vary tremendously. Studies from the 90s estimate that the setoides weighed at least 6.4 tons, while the isis, despite being shorter, weighed more at over 7.2 tons. However, a study from 2025 revised these estimates and suggested that a 60-foot Basilosaurus setoides was actually around 17 tons, while Basilosaurus isis maxed out at 15 tons. Regardless of these varying numbers, it is pretty clear that these were humongous creatures. Based on fossil deposits, they also favored the shallows, a trait they shared with Mosasaurus. They preferred warm waters rich with seagrasses and reigned as apex predators, eating the fish or whales that ate the fish that ate the grasses. Another trait shared with Mosasaurus is massive jaws with wicked-looking teeth, a clear sign that these animals would not be interested in the vegan menu. The teeth were designed for grabbing and possibly chewing, given the pattern of wear. Bite force is estimated to have been at least 3,600 pounds per square inch, more than enough to crush shark cartilage or Dorodon bones. It is believed that setoides lived almost exclusively on sharks and fish. Isis ate fish too, but stomach contents show that it also fed on smaller cetaceans, particularly the dolphin-esque Dorodon, which was plentiful in what we now call the Mediterranean region. Paleontologists have also unearthed Dorodon fossils with bite marks consistent with Basilosaurus isis teeth. Like most toothed whales, Basilosaurus was primarily an active predator, though it would not have been above scavenging free meals. Analysis of the skull shows that Basilosaurus did not have room for a melon, which is a mass of adipose tissue in the forehead of modern toothed whales. The melon is responsible for modulating and focusing a whale's vocalizations for echolocation and communication with other whales. Because of this, it is believed that Basilosaurus could not echolocate, and it probably wasn't as social as many modern whale species. There is a lot of mystery surrounding the specific cause of these mighty creatures' extinction. What is clear to science is that there was a mass extinction event that marked the end of the Eocene and the beginning of the Oligocene epoch, and countless creatures, including all Archaeoceti whales, were wiped out. What that event was, though, is hard to say. Leading theories include climate change that led to an intolerable drop in ocean temperatures, as well as volcanic activity, and, possibly, meteor impact.
What was the difference between Deinosuchus and Sarcosuchus? Crocodiles and crocodile-like creatures have been around for well over 100 million years, displaying the kind of relentlessness and ruthlessness required to win the treacherous game of survival. In today's video, we're going to focus on two legendary croc relatives from prehistory, Deinosuchus and Sarcosuchus. We will look at various aspects about these ancient predators, from their classification, time periods, dimensions, and likely behaviors. By the end, you'll have a much clearer understanding of the similarities and differences between these incredible creatures. So let's journey back in time and check out some monsters. Deinosuchus. Deinosuchus, which is ancient Greek for terrible crocodile, is a prehistoric crocodilian from the late Cretaceous period. As far as classification, Deinosuchus is actually a genus, which was made up of several species. These animals were also part of the Alligatoroides superfamily under the Crocodilia order and the Archosauriformes clade. Fossil evidence suggests that it lived in various parts of what we call the United States and Mexico. Fossils have been found in 10 U.S. states, including Montana, North Carolina, and Texas. Fossil dating shows that they lived from 82 to 73 million years ago, meaning they lived alongside some of the biggest and baddest dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. While the cause for extinction is not known, It's clear that they didn't die out during the extinction event that marked the end of the Cretaceous and its dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Unfortunately, no complete fossils have been found yet, so scientists have had to work with fragments to build a picture of what the animals looked like. Famous reconstructions include the Deinosuchus hatcheri skeleton at the National History Museum of Utah and the Deinosuchus riograndensis at the Puebla Museum of Evolution in Mexico. Though not 100% accurate, these reconstructions still paint a fascinating and frightening picture. Deinosuchus was huge. Estimates place full-grown adult specimens at 35 feet in length, with a possibility that they even grew larger. Weight estimates are even trickier, ranging from 2.8 to 5.5 tons, or 2.5 to 5 metric tons. The teeth were also huge, built for gripping and crushing, and they had vertical grooves running right around them. Given these estimates, it's more than clear that the biggest Deinosuchus were comfortably larger than any modern crocodilian. For comparison, saltwater crocodiles top out at around 23 feet long and weigh a maximum of a little over 2,200 pounds. What isn't 100% certain is whether Deinosuchus is the largest crocodilian or crocodiliform of all time, with a few other creatures taking a claim to that frightening title. Despite its large size, Deinosuchus was structurally similar to modern alligators and caiman. It even had similar bony plates, known as osteoderms, running along its large leathery back. Like alligators, its snout was broad rather than especially elongated like crocs. Like a typical crocodilian, Deinosuchus was semi-aquatic, with various adaptations for success in the water. It had webbed feet to aid swimming, as well as a bony palate that separated the nasal and mouth cavities. This separation allowed Deinosuchus to breathe through the nose, while the mouth and the rest of the body were fully submerged in water. A powerful tail provided thrust when swimming or lunging at prey, while large, efficient lungs would have allowed it to go for long stretches without taking a breath. Present-day alligators can hold their breath for up to 30 minutes, while crocs can spend an entire hour underwater. Doubtless, Deinosuchus was somewhere between these two ranges. If the animal was anything like modern alligators and caiman, it would have preferred freshwater environments. However, it would have been able to tolerate saltwater if it had the same desalination glands that modern crocs have. So far, scientists lean towards the latter school, given the discovery of fossils in brackish estuaries with easy access to the sea. Given its immense size, Deinosuchus was probably pretty sluggish on land. Though capable of traveling fair distances and even high walking, adults were probably not running anything down. Juveniles and adolescents would have been much more mobile on the ground. In the water, though, even the biggest dinos were as elegant and graceful as ballerinas, as countless poor animals found out. Looking at its size, teeth, and what we know about modern crocodilians, there is no doubt that Deinosuchus was a merciless predator capable of unimaginable violence. These animals would have had a varied diet, largely determined by size. Hatchlings likely preyed on insects, other small invertebrates, small amphibians, fish, and mammals. Larger individuals would have preferred bigger prey: turtles, bigger fish and mammals, cephalopods, various kinds of dinosaurs, and perhaps even other crocodilians. At 5 tons, a single Deinosuchus would have made an entire water body horrifically perilous for all but the very largest dinosaurs. Doubtless, many animals chose to remain thirsty over risking waters with known dino activity. Chief among its largest terrestrial prey were the ornithopods, some of the most widespread and populous herbivorous dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. The crocodilian's immense size and biting power would have allowed it to submerge and drown big animals, crush shells, and pierce through tough hides or body armor. Ambush predation was the primary tactic for land-loving prey, while aquatic prey was fiercely dispatched in high-octane underwater pursuits. The beast's bite force is calculated based on the size of the skull, and in turn the estimation of the amount of muscle mass associated with a certain skull size. Scaling based on modern crocodilians is also thrown into the math at times. All in all, estimates for Deinosuchus bite power range between 18,000 and 23,000 pounds per square inch, psi, far more than the modern Salty's 3,700 psi. Deinosuchus, like modern crocodilians, was a habitual performer of the death roll. a maneuver where the animal grabs hold of a chunk of meat and rolls sideways furiously to rip off said chunk into a swallowable portion. Sarcosuchus. While we'd love to tell you that the waters of the world were safe before Deinosuchus, we all know that isn't true. Just as Deinosuchus terrorized the waters of North America, another equally frightful croc-like monster was doing the same in South America and Africa. Sarcosuchus, aka the flesh crocodile, was a menace that lurked beneath the surface during the early Cretaceous, roughly 133 to 112 million years ago. The name is also ancient Greek, with sarco translating to flesh and suchus meaning crocodile. Unlike Deinosuchus, Sarcosuchus wasn't part of the Alligatoroides superfamily, instead being classified under the now extinct Phyllidosauриdae family. This means it has little direct relation to any modern crocodilian. So far, paleontologists have unearthed two species under the genus, Sarcosuchus harti and the gargantuan Sarcosuchus imperator. Sarcosuchus imperator remains were initially discovered in the Teneri Desert, part of modern Niger in Africa's Sahara region. However, back in the animal's day, this region was an idyllic tropical environment, rich with rivers that catered well to large, cold-blooded monsters. Sarcosuchus harti fossils, on the other hand, are mostly found in the Ilhas Formation of Brazil's Rio Basin. This region was an expansive lake plain rich with all kinds of aquatic and terrestrial creatures. It's clear to see that Sarcosuchus was much more partial to freshwater environments than Deinosuchus. Both species lived alongside fish like the coelacanth and Lepidopus, as well as iguanodontian dinosaurs like Ouranosaurus and Lurdosaurus. Imperator also lived alongside, and probably hunted, terrestrial dinosaurs like Suchomimus, Eocarcharia, and Nigersaurus. Unfortunately, fossils are quite scattered and scant, with most remains consisting of teeth, bits of vertebra, and skull fragments. As a result, a lot of what we think we know about these prehistoric predators is based on reconstructions. One of the world's most famous Sarcosuchus imperator skeleton reconstructions is at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. Needless to say, these animals were huge. Imperator, specifically, is estimated to have measured up to 31.2 feet from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail. Weight estimates range between 3.8 and 4.7 tons. These animals had long snouts, which made up 3/4 of the total skull length, a marked difference from the much more broad-snouted Deinosuchus and its modern alligator kin. These snouts were lined with 70 teeth on the upper jaw and 62 teeth on the lower jaw. Sarcosuchus's upper jaw was a little longer than the lower two, and it featured a pronounced expansion at the top of the snout. This bulbous expansion is called a bulla, and it is quite similar to the gara that marks the snout of male gharials. However, all Sarcosuchus skull fossils on record have bullas, which means that it was not exclusive to one sex. The back was also lined with osteoderms, though these were more uniform along their path from the neck to the tail. Deinosuchus and modern crocodilians, in comparison, have varying osteoderms on different parts of the back, neck, and tail. Unlike most animals in the Phyllidosauриdae family, Sarcosuchus hunted more than just fish, mainly because of its size and freshwater locales. It was what biologists refer to as a generalist predator, which basically means it killed and ate anything it wanted and could overpower. Terrestrial animals would have been dragged to the depths if they got too close to the water's edge, drowning in terror and violence. However, the narrow snout and precise dental layout made Sarcosuchus an expert at catching fish, much like other phyllidosauриds and modern gharials. The snout would cut through the water at lightning speed, allowing the teeth to skewer fish before they knew what hit them. Based on the skull's biomechanics, scientists are not convinced Sarcosuchus performed death rolls to rip chunks of flesh off its victims. Perhaps it just used its strong jaws and neck muscles to pull meat from corpses. Sarcosuchus was, without a doubt, an apex predator in the waters it dwelled in during its day. And its day was fairly long. Based on analysis of fossilized osteoderms, these animals required 50 to 60 years to reach full size, which suggests a possible life expectancy of around 100 years, barring predation, of course. Again, the specific cause of Sarcosuchus extinction is not known, but the leading theory is that climate change and competition from other aquatic reptiles were key to its demise. What was the difference between Smilodon and Homotherium? Prehistoric cats never get old, mostly because they are, so old and mysterious. After all, at the end of the day, all we have are bones. The subjects of today's video are a pair of cats you wouldn't want to pick a bone with if you were around during the Ice Age, the saber-toothed Smilodon and Homotherium. Sit back, relax, and enjoy as we take a closer gander at these ancient killers, where and how they lived, and why they went extinct. What's the reality between these two cats? Let's find out. Saber-toothed nightmare. The word saber-toothed cat generally refers to the several genera and species within an extinct subgroup within Felidae, the cat family. This subgroup is the Machairodontinae, or scimitar-toothed cat subfamily. As you already know, these kitties were largely typified by extra-long upper canine teeth. However, the length of said teeth varied depending on this particular species of Machairodont. A Machaira is a type of ancient Greek short sword, and odontos is Greek for tooth. The cats themselves are deader than the ancient Greek Empire, having died out in the early Holocene, about 8,000 years ago, after a nearly 20 million year run. So far, paleontologists have unearthed around 80 species distributed across 23 genera. These animals range from the sizes of lynxes to brown bears and had a wide distribution across Africa, Eurasia, and the Americas. Today's subjects, Homotherium and Smilodon, are, or were, two of the larger genera within the subfamily. Homotherium lived from the Pliocene to the late Pleistocene, temporal range of 4 million to 12,000 years ago. Fossils have been found in Eurasia, North America, and Africa. Alleged Homotherium remains have been found in South America, but these are still the subject of much debate. There are 3 widely accepted species, though more may be possible. There was Homotherium latidens from Eurasia, and Homotherium ceram and Homotherium ischiris from North America. The Homotherium fossils found in Africa have yet to be solidly classified into a particular species because of how fragmented they are. One possible South American species is Homotherium venezuelensis, but some scholars argue that this animal is actually Xenosmilus, another genus of Machairodont, very similar to Homotherium. Smilodon, on the other hand, first emerged during the early Pleistocene and went extinct in the early Holocene, a range of 2.5 million to 8,000 years ago. All 3 species lived in the Americas, literally from the northernmost tip to the southernmost. Now, when we say that these cats were large, we mean pretty much bigger than most modern cats. Homotherium was the smaller of the two, and its largest species was about the size of a modern African lion or tiger. Body length was between 4 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 7 inches, while shoulder height was up to 3 feet 7 inches. Weight was up to 440 pounds, making it a pretty hefty unit. Smilodon was around the same size in many cases, but some species were much, much larger. The weight range for the genus as a whole ranged from 120 to 800 pounds on average. Smilodon gracilis was the smallest of the lot, and North America's Smilodon fatalis was in the middle of the range. Smilodon populator, the saber-toothed tiger of the South American wilds, was arguably the largest cat ever, with some big males weighing around 1,000 pounds or more. Both cats were considerably robust, with Smilodon being significantly bulkier and more solid than modern lions and tigers. They were similar in proportion to modern forest cats, with rear limbs that were a touch shorter than the front, which suggests that they were built for moderate speed pursuits and ambush predation rather than long drawn-out chases. Smilodon had particularly formidable forelimbs, likely for grabbing and manipulating prey like many modern big cats. However, Homotherium's front limbs were not as robust, and the claws were relatively short, which suggests it didn't use them for grabbing as much. Instead, Homotherium had particularly large incisors, which it used to grab hold of prey, much like a dog or hyena. These two groups of scimitar cats would have overlapped in certain places and times, particularly in the Americas. They would have competed for a lot of the same prey, including wild pigs, horses, birds, bovids, and more. People were doubtlessly part of the menu whenever the opportunity arose, but it's more than likely that humans had the upper hand in that particular struggle. Still, in a one-on-one physical clash with no weapons, a human would have stood no chance against a Homotherium or Smilodon cat. Of course, these cats had a particular set of natural weapons that set them apart from most other cats: their sabers. Homotherium's canines were on the shorter side of the Machairodont spectrum at around 4 inches. However, this is still longer than the canines of any living cat species, though it's unclear if they would have been visible when the Homotherium had its mouth closed. These teeth were broad-based and serrated, making them perfect for powerful slashing. In hunting, Homotherium used its teeth to savagely sever throats and cause rapid blood loss. With its long and powerful neck, Homotherium was quick and strong enough to get in position to strike killing blows without having to clamp and hold. In battle with other predators, and even humans, these teeth would have been capable of inflicting deep puncture wounds, allowing Homotherium to escape or move in for the killing blow. On the opposite end of the saber-sized chart is Smilodon, which had the longest canines in the entire subfamily. These canines ranged from 5 to 11 inches, with Populator boasting the longest. It's highly unlikely that Smilodon could hide these saber teeth like Homotherium, and most depictions reflect that. Smilodon's teeth were noticeably narrower, more slender, and lacked serrations. The leading theory for how Smilodon cats used their teeth is that they used their considerable upper body strength and forelimbs to pin prey in position before delivering quick stabbing bites to soft, vulnerable spots. Smilodon teeth were fairly delicate and were at risk of breaking if they bit into bone, or if they were exposed to stress caused by struggling prey for long periods. Being stabbed by 11-inch daggers out in the prehistoric wild was pretty much a death sentence, even for some of the biggest animals. Such blows to the neck or underbelly would have led to severe bleeding and death. Smilodon and Homotherium cats could also open their jaws more than 90 degrees to give their extra-long canines room to work. Like modern cats, they fed by slicing meat off with their carnassial teeth, which are at the sides of the jaws. This allowed them to eat without their long canines getting in the way. Interestingly, despite having bigger teeth, Smilodon likely had a weaker bite force than modern big cats. Smilodon's skull had a fairly small set of zygomatic arches, which means it could not support large temporalis muscles. The temporalis muscles are responsible for biting and chewing, and are therefore what powers the jaws. After crunching a bunch of numbers based on the size and geometry of the various skulls and arches, a bunch of scientists concluded that, on average, Smilodon cats had a bite that was merely a third of a modern lion's. In other words, Smilodon had between 220 and 330 pounds per square inch of biting power, which is lower than some domestic dogs. This is the same story for Homotherium, which also sacrificed sheer biting power for quick kills. Again, skull structures suggest weak jaw muscles compared to modern big cats that rely on bite force to strangle big prey and crush bone. The lack of bite force also casts a doubt over how effective these cats were at harvesting bones for marrow. Surely, as animals that lived through the Ice Ages, Smilodon and Homotherium would have been able to get maximum nutrition from kills or scavenging jobs, right? Well, maybe not. Perhaps this jaw power issue was part of the two Machairodont's ultimate demise. Despite being cousins within the same subfamily, Smilodon and Homotherium were actually separated by over 18 million years of divergence from a common ancestor. These two, along with the rest of Machairodontini, are separated from the two living felid subfamilies, Felinae and Pantherini, by over 20 million years of genetic divergence. Felinae is home to small to medium cats, including domestic cats, lynxes, cougars, cheetahs, and servals. Pantherini is the big cat subfamily, and it is made up of jaguars, lions, tigers, and leopards. Smilodon and Homotherium often lived in similar places and at the same time as these cats, yet they and the rest of the Machairodonts are all gone these days. Their extinctions are largely a mystery to us today, but a few theories abound. In the case of Homotherium latidens, scientists blame the emergence of new large cat species, like the cave lion Panthera fossilis, and the intense competition that they brought. Smilodon's extinction is largely blamed on the disappearance of a lot of the mega herbivores that were a staple of its diet. Animals like giant bison, wild horses, camelids, and giant sloths died out during the late Pleistocene. and the way their demise coincided with that of the Smilodon cats is often used as evidence. American Homotherium species are believed to have gone extinct for similar reasons. The impact of mega-herbivores being wiped out was amplified by the level of competition for small to medium prey. Other felids like lynxes, cougars, and jaguars, as well as other predator groups like wild dogs, were much better at hunting these smaller critters, and they could get enough nutrition from this small prey to sustain themselves. Then, of course, there are human beings. Both Smilodon and Homotherium would have crossed paths with people during the latter stages of their existence, and humans were a threat to the cats directly, a threat to their habitats, and a major competitor for food. In fact, Smilodon disappeared from the Americas around the same time Homo sapiens showed up. Another potential cause for these big cats' downfall might have been how exposed their cubs were. Other predators and humans would not have hesitated to kill Smilodon or Homotherium cubs on sight, and given the fairly slow reproduction rate among big cats, this could have dealt a fatal blow to their populations. Unfortunately, there is very little evidence to prove this particular theory, but the emergence of new predators is often a major threat to the vulnerable young of resident animals that aren't used to predation. In addition to the mystery of their extinction, there is a lot of murkiness surrounding their respective sociability. Many researchers often lean on the relative proximity of certain fossils, particularly at California's La Brea tar pits, to hint that these cats were highly social and lived in groups. Another potential sign of gregarious living was that these cats were pretty large and tended to operate in open grasslands. Lions, which also live in grasslands, are highly dependent on group life and hunting to offset their bulk, lack of stamina, and limited cove. Of course, it's important to remember that lions are the general outlier when it comes to modern wild cats. Most felids are actually very solitary and territorial, and many other scholars use this fact as a basis for their assertions that Homotherium and Smilodon were, in fact, solo hunters as well. What is the difference between the dire wolf and the gray wolf? Wolves are the undisputed kings of the wild world of canines, and that's been the status quo for thousands upon thousands of years. Today, the widespread gray wolf is the largest and most dominant wild canine around. But did you know that there was another big bad wolf ruling the wild in prehistory? Of course, we're talking about the legendary dire wolf from the Pleistocene and Holocene. So we've decided to do a little comparison. What are the similarities between the wolves? What are the differences? And why did the dire wolf die out while the gray wolf thrived? Let's talk about it. Taxonomy. The dire wolf is known to taxonomists as Deinosuchus dirus, and paleontologists assert that there were at least two subspecies, Deinosuchus dirus and Deinosuchus dirus gildei. However, some scientists still refer to the animal as Canis dirus, its original taxonomic name. Naturally, determining the extent and number of subspecies for extinct animals is a tough task, to say the least. However, dire wolf fossils are fairly common finds. And we also have a very special mass fossil site where many specimens have been unearthed, the La Brea tar pits. These ancient tar pits are a wonderland for paleontologists, and their chemical makeup has helped preserve the fossils of a bunch of amazing prehistoric creatures. Mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, American lions, and of course, dire wolves have been found here. And these finds have gone a very long way in helping us get a better understanding of such creatures. In contrast, we don't really need tar pits or any other special preservation sites to know about the gray wolf, mainly because it's still around. Despite being a fellow member of the Canidae or dog family, the gray wolf is not in the Deinosuchus genus. Instead, it is in the Canis genus, and the full scientific name of the species is Canis lupus. There are 38 Canis lupus subspecies, including the Eurasian wolf, Canis lupus lupus, the dingo, Canis lupus dingo, and the domestic dog, Canis lupus familiaris. That's right, every domestic dog breed, half-breed, or mongrel is descended from gray wolves domesticated by humans all over the world. Habitat. Gray wolves and their subspecies are found all over the world. Obviously, domestic dogs are found pretty much anywhere human settlements are located. However, even wild wolves have a near global distribution. with Antarctica being the only major continent without a native Canis lupus subspecies. These wolves live in plains, forests, deserts, tundras, swamps, mountains, along coastlines, and even on the edges of farms, towns, and other human settlements. That said, wolves often prefer to live deep in the wild whenever possible, but their main priority is obviously being close to their prey and potential food sources. The dire wolf was also fairly adaptable when it came to habitat. Fossils have been found in plains, mountain forests, and semi-arid grasslands in the Americas. Suspected direwolf remains have also been unearthed in the steppes of eastern Asia. Based on this evidence, it appears that the direwolf population were highest in lowland plains, where common prey was most abundant. Evolution and time range. Gray wolves have been around for several 100,000 years at least, though some fossils from the Arctic Circle are speculated to be north of 1 million years old. Canis lupus is descended from Canis mosbachensis, another extinct wolf we might talk about in detail soon. Mosbachensis was predominantly based in Europe about 1.5 million to 400,000 years ago, or the early to middle Pleistocene to paleontologists. Its descendants migrated to North America thanks to the Great Bering Land Bridge, and the rest is prehistory. The gray wolf emerged and survived trials and terrains steeped in danger, surviving some of prehistory's biggest and meanest mammalian killers. Giant bears, giant cats, and even giant dogs like the dire wolf were just a few examples. But before that, when Mosbachensis was still succumbing to extinction in the Old World, the dire wolf thrived in the New. Even more interestingly, no one is sure how they evolved and what they evolved from. With raging debates all around the dog pound, scientists now settle for the simple canini taxonomic classification. Canini is basically a subtribe within the Canidae family, and one of the earliest documented members of this group was Argentavis, which looked like a giant coyote and lived around 9 million years ago. A few more millennia, glacial periods, adaptations, and migrations later, the Canis genus emerged in Eurasia, and an unknown number of genetic lines migrated back to the Americas, where the dire wolf lived and eventually died. Most interesting of all are the recent developments involving CRISPR gene editing technology. Basically, a group of scientists have spliced isolated dire wolf genes into gray wolf embryos to create hybrid wolves that have the posture, skull shape, and jaw power of the believed to be extinct dire wolf. So far, 3 of these fascinating pups have been born, and they're growing fast. Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi are their names. And being the hottest new stars of the scientific world is their game for now. As they approached 6 months old, the CRISPR dire wolves had already outgrown hand-rearing playtime with humans. They weighed about 80 pounds at that age too, and will be considerably larger by the time they are a year old. Of course, because of their largely gray wolf genetic makeup, it's not possible to classify these animals as true dire wolves. Maybe with time, more of the dire wolf's genetic makeup will be discovered and brought to life for real somehow. Appearance and size. Part of the gray wolf's incredible adaptability is their wide range of size and appearance. Coats range from red, gray, white, black, brown, tawny, olive, and an endless mixture of these and other colors. Coats sometimes reflect the general habitat in a camouflage way, and sometimes they don't. Unlike many wild cats who kill with assassin or power styles, wolves rely on tenacity and endurance. As a result, they are not really reliant on stealth. Of course, when it comes to power, wolves are no slouches in the slightest. Tough, agile, and gifted with near-infinite stamina, gray wolves are built on a lean, mean skeletal frame that can support various muscle masses. That means they can get seriously big and bulky in areas with rich, juicy prey, or they can be skinny and gaunt when the going gets tough. Coats also vary across subspecies. Most northern hemisphere gray wolves have double coats, which allows them to grow significant winter fur for when the chill gets serious. When it comes to size, the numbers vary a lot. Body length is between 41 and 63 inches, while shoulder height ranges from 31 to 33 inches. Skulls are about 9.1 to 11 inches long. Weight is from 26 to 175 pounds, with the average being 88 pounds. Males are generally larger than females of similar age and ecosystem. Wolves also tend to get bigger the further north you go, a phenomenon known as Bergmann's rule. Essentially, wolves in colder areas can reach greater sizes than wolves in warmer parts of the world. Gray wolves also have fairly long legs, which helps them with speed and navigating through deep snow. Now, the dire wolf was a little different from most gray wolf subspecies, but at the same time, it was similar in build and proportion to modern northwestern wolves, Canis lupus occidentalis, and Yukon wolves, Canis lupus palmacilius. Skull length was a bit longer than a modern wolf's, about 12 inches. Dire wolf skulls are also a bit wider in the frontal region and palate. However, their feet were a little smaller than northern gray wolves. Scientists have also managed to assemble full dire wolf backbones, and it turns out they had the same number of vertebrae as gray wolves. Dire wolves also had proportionally shorter limbs than most gray wolves, with Deinosuchus dirus gildei sporting shorter legs than Deinosuchus dirus. Based on the various bones and fossils, size estimates for dire wolves are quite variable. The gildei dire wolf had an average body weight of 132 pounds, while dirus was a bit bigger at 150 pounds. This means they were about the same size as the largest gray wolves. Of course, average means the animals could be bigger or smaller than these figures. Size would depend on sex, location, time of year, and food availability. Again, females were smaller than males. No one is certain what dire wolf fur was like, but there is a strong possibility that colors were quite variable. However, as Ice Age creatures, it is more likely they had double coats for coping with winter. Another distinct feature found on Mayer dire wolf finds is a penis bone that was significantly longer than those of male gray wolves. This penis bone, also known as a baculum, is pretty unique within the dog family, which suggests the dire wolf may have had markedly different mating and reproductive behaviors from gray wolves and other canids. Additionally, dire wolf remains show strong evidence of physical plasticity over time. Body size, skulls, and teeth changed and readapted over time and across habitats. Grassland dire wolves, for instance, had bigger jaws and chompers for crushing horse or plains bison bones, while forest wolves had more compact weapons to tackle deer, rodents, birds, and reptiles. Behavior. Gray wolves are both famous and infamous predators. They are strong, fast, and highly social. Living in packs, the wolf is an undisputed apex predator in much of its domain. Bears, big cats, other dogs, and of course humans are their main enemies for the same reason: they're dangerous. Packs can reach 20 individuals or more, and territories can be larger than Chicago or London, which means any citizen of Wolftown is always on their toes. Groupings are strictly hierarchical, with an alpha male and female pair being the top dogs. Everyone else sorts themselves out in order of strength, age, and mentality. Gray wolves are incredible endurance athletes that run prey down to exhaustion, and their teeth and numbers finish the job. Dire wolf hunting strategy and social dynamics are the subjects of a lot of speculation. That said, animals from La Brea can paint a picture of their diet. Pronghorn, camels like the extinct camelops, sloths, and other mammals were primary prey, as well as juvenile or weak bison. Additionally, dire wolves were probably more opportunistic scavengers than highly specialized hunters, a bit like modern spotted hyenas. Using their bulk and backup, they could easily drive off a number of other predators from their kills. Gray wolves themselves were likely common victims of these meat muggings. Ultimately, thanks to gradual shifts in climate and the resulting impact on prey availability, dire wolves and other iconic meat eaters like Smilodon and the American lion went extinct. Competition with smaller, more efficient hunters became too stiff, and the arrival of humans was the straw that blew the dire wolf's house down once, but maybe not for all. With DNA science doing its thing, we may soon live in a world where the dire wolf howls wild and free again. What is the difference between mastodons and mammoths? Elephants and elephant-like animals are truly wonderful and fascinating creatures. From their sheer size, crazy intelligence, and complex social dynamics, these animals are and were truly special. Today we're looking at two of the most iconic prehistoric elephant cousins, mastodons and mammoths. What's the story behind these two? Were they one and the same, or were they totally different animals? Let's talk about it. Mastodons. Mastodons are an extinct group of elephant-like mammals that lived during the late Miocene all through to the early Holocene. However, unlike modern elephants, mastodons are not part of the Elephantidae family. Instead, they belong to Mammuthidae, a family of fascinating elephantomorphs that are now, sadly, long extinct. Within Mammuthidae is the genus Mammoth, the mastodons. So far, scientists have confirmed 8 mastodon species, with a further 4 being debated. What's interesting about the word mammoth is that the word is actually German for mammoth. But in modern taxonomy, at least, mammoths are not classified within the genus or even the Mammuthidae family. The word mastodon itself is an amalgamation of the ancient Greek words mastos, which means breast, and otis, which means tooth. While mastodons may not be true mammoths, they were truly mammoth-sized. Naturally, true size and weight figures are murky at best for such prehistoric animals, as scientists can only get so much from bones and skeletal structure. But there is no denying that these guys were huge. Mammoth borsoni, one of the debated species, ranks as the largest of all mastodons and one of the largest mammals ever to walk the earth. This titan of Miocene and Pleistocene Eurasia may have had an average weight of 18 tons, which is about 16,000 kilograms. And that's average, meaning some specimens were bigger. The American Warren mastodon, aka Mammut americanum, which is one of the more common mammoth finds, was significantly smaller, but still comparable to modern African elephants, the biggest land animals today. The average specimen is believed to have weighed about 8.6 tons while standing 9.5 feet at the shoulder. This may have been a little shorter than the max heights of modern elephants, but it was heavier. Bone structure, particularly the pelvic bones, indicates that mastodons were a bit more robust than their distant cousins. Some researchers believe that Warren mastodons could have been up to 80% heavier than elephants of the same shoulder height. That's almost twice as heavy as the heaviest land animal around today. Crazy. Like elephants, though, mastodons were full-time vegetarians. In fact, they were fullivorous, which is just a cool way of saying they ate a lot of leaves. The clearest evidence of this leafy diet is the presence of zygodont molars, which featured sharp ridges that allowed them to shred leaves at an industrial scale. Modern elephants don't have this style of dentition because they have thin flat molars for versatile mixed feeding and grazing. By virtue of being potentially 80% bigger than elephants, it's clear that mastodons spent most of their waking hours foraging and browsing leaves. A modern elephant can eat up to 375 pounds of vegetation in a single day. Working with that same 80% weight difference, it looks like mastodons might have been able to consume 675 pounds of leaves in a single 24-hour window. Crazier. So, what kind of places and environments would accommodate mastodons and their enormous appetites? Well, fossil records indicate that mastodons emerged and lived in North and Central America, with the greatest numbers found in what we now call the United States. Mastodons would later migrate into Eurasia via the Bering Land Bridge. They lived in cool, lush woodlands with ample browsing. Their feet were wide and sported thick, stubby toes, allowing the animals to walk on soft, muddy earth. Mastodon fossils also suggest that it was a social animal that lived in small, close-knit herds. The nature of bones found in concentrated sites also indicates that they lived in matriarchal groups consisting of adult females and their young. This is very similar to modern elephants, whose herds are made up of females and calves while being led by a dominant and elderly matriarch. Males lived alone or even in smaller bachelor groups, which is also just like modern elephants. They would leave their birth herd upon reaching sexual maturity and make their way out into the world. We have no clear way of fully understanding the dynamics of mastodon reproduction, but we can at least infer from what we know about elephants today. For instance, it's unlikely mastodons had strict reproductive windows or mating seasons like many other animals. It's more probable that males and females mated whenever they were ready and available. So, how did the mastodon go extinct? Well, the dominant theory is that climate and environmental changes during the Pleistocene led to the drastic reduction in forests that could support them. American mastodon species, in particular, were victims of the Great North American Pleistocene extinction phase, which saw the disappearance of many megafauna animals. Humans are another possible factor, though how prehistoric people managed to overhunt 10-ton behemoths is a rather fascinating mystery. The animals did not do themselves any favors either with their immense dietary needs and low reproductive rates. Rearing a mastodon to independence was a major time investment, from the long gestation periods to the even longer dependent stage. They simply could not reproduce quickly enough to offset the pressures exerted on them by the environment and predation. Of course, despite its extinction, the mastodon is still an important cultural icon to this day. Bones and skeletal reconstructions are major attractions at natural history museums all over North America and Europe. They've also been portrayed and referenced in countless pop culture and media material, meaning that the mastodon will never truly die. Mammoths. Mammoths were elephant-like animals from the extinct Mammothus genus. The Mammothus genus belongs to the Elephantidae family, alongside modern-day elephants and a bunch of other extinct elephantids. The family is in turn under the Proboscideae order, which was also home to other families that are now long extinct, including the mastodons Mammutidae. The word mammoth comes from a native Siberian term for earth horn. The first fossils and frozen carcasses were found in Siberia in the 17th century. For a long time, mammoths were an important part of Siberian native cultures. Some tribes even revered the beasts as water spirits. To date, over 25,000 mammoth fossils and remains have been found throughout Eurasia, North America, and Africa. Further evidence is found in the many rock paintings depicting the animals. There are 10 officially recognized species of mammoth. The woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primogenius, is the best known because of its prominent place in scientific discussion and pop culture. About 10 million years ago, Gomphotheres, a family of fully terrestrial proboscideans in Africa, spawned a spin-off group known as Elephantidae. This group evolved further until the emergence of the earliest mammoth species, Mammuthus subplanifrons, during the Miocene around 6.2 to 5.3 million years ago. Mammuthus africanus is another notable African species that dates between 5 and 2.58 million years ago. The Arabian land bridge allowed mammoths to migrate and spread into Eurasia around 3.2 million years ago. Mammuthus romanus is the earliest Eurasian mammoth we know of, and it later evolved into the Meridionalis, aka the southern mammoth. About 1.7 million years ago, Meridionalis gave rise to Trogontherii, the steppe mammoth of Central and Eastern Asia. This steppe mammoth would later cross the Bering Land Bridge and give rise to Columbi, the Columbian mammoth. The steppe mammoths that remained in Siberia eventually became smaller and evolved into Primigenius, the woolly mammoth. These woolly mammoths would also cross the land bridge and reach North America. The youngest mammoth remains were discovered on Russia's Wrangel Island. These finds indicate that mammoths were around as recently as 3,700 to 4,000 years ago. All in all, there were at least 10 different species of mammoth during prehistoric times, and they were quite varied, especially physically. Size is one such physical aspect. Most mammoths were huge, as you would expect of any elephant cousin. However, some were bigger than others. Primigenius, the woolly mammoth, is believed to have reached a maximum height of 11 feet and a maximum weight of 13,200 pounds. It may have got considerably larger than this, but fossil evidence is limited. These dimensions put the woolly mammoth on par with modern African elephants when it comes to both height and weight. However, the southern steppe and Columbian mammoths were bigger. These two species were the largest mammoths on record, though it is unclear who was number one. Bulls of both species are believed to have reached 13 feet at the shoulder and weighed about 24,250 pounds. Again, it's possible that there were even larger specimens. Like with modern elephants, female mammoths were significantly smaller than males, but still enormous in their own right. Both sexes of all species bore tusks. Shape and size varied quite drastically. As you probably already know, mammoth tusks are far more pronounced than elephant tusks. The biggest tusk on record is a 16-foot marvel that belonged to a Colombian mammoth. Meanwhile, the longest woolly mammoth tusk is 13.1 feet long. For comparison, the biggest mastodon tusk ever found measures 16 feet and 4 inches. That said, not all mammoths were overly massive. Notable species like the Cretan dwarf mammoth, Mammuthus creticus, were relatively tiny. This species in particular evolved such a small frame as a result of insular dwarfism. In other words, it had to get smaller to efficiently make use of its limited island resources. This little mammoth measured 3.3 feet at the shoulder and weighed no more than 400 pounds. Other notable differences. While mammoths and mastodons shared a lot of similarities, they were completely different animals, as we shall soon see. For starters, mastodons were adapted for life in woodlands, where they could cater to a huge need for leaves and foliage. In contrast, mammoths were grazers that preferred open habitats. These dietary differences also influenced dental differences. Mastodons had cone-shaped molars for slicing leaves, while mammoths had flatter ridged molars for chewing grass. Tusks, which are the most prominent teeth, were different too. Mastodon tusks are not as curved as mammoth tusks and are more akin to modern elephant tusks. Then, there are some skeletal and structural differences. Firstly, mastodons were not as tall as the tallest mammoth species, but were generally stockier and heavier, especially when compared to mammoth specimens of similar height. Secondly, mammoth skulls have prominent bulbous foreheads, while mastodon skulls have gently sloping foreheads similar to African elephants. Finally, we have timeline differences. Mastodons first emerged on the scene around 27 million years ago and went extinct approximately 11,000 years ago. Mammoths showed up far later, about 6 million years ago, and they were around until about 4,000 years ago. What was the difference between Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus? Have you ever wondered which giant sea monster was the bigger, brawnier beast, Mosasaurus or Kronosaurus? Imagine meeting two colossal reptiles in the deep blue. One a sleek-bodied swimmer with a tail fin, the other a bulky, short-necked terror. What would you notice first? One clue is that neither was actually a dinosaur. They were marine reptiles ruling the Cretaceous seas. Let's dive in and see how these two prehistoric sea lizards stacked up. Two giant marine reptiles. Both Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus were huge marine predators, but they came from different reptile families. Kronosaurus was a member of the plesiosaur group called pliosaurs. These had very short necks and big heads, with 4 strong flippers propelling them through water. In fact, Kronosaurus queenslandicus, the best-known species, grew roughly 30 to 34 feet long and could weigh around 7 to 12 tons. It had a stout, barrel-like body and a head crowned with big, conical teeth. By contrast, Mosasaurus was a mosasaur, an aquatic lizard relative. It had a long, snake-like body and a paddle-shaped tail fin. The biggest Mosasaurus species, like M. hoffmanii, reached up to about 39 to 50 feet long and weighed roughly 13 to 15 tons. So on average, Mosasaurus was longer and heavier than Kronosaurus, though estimates vary. Remember, neither of these were dinosaurs. Kronosaurus and Mosasaurus were marine reptiles, more like giant sea turtles or lizards than anything on land. For example, Mosasaurus belonged to an extinct group of squamate reptiles. Think underwater monitor lizard. Kronosaurus was a plesiosaur with a short neck. Jaws, teeth, and hunting style. One of the most exciting differences is in their teeth and jaws. Kronosaurus had a big, heavy skull with strong, conical teeth. more like grappling hooks than blades. Its teeth were excellent for grabbing and crushing hard-shelled prey, like turtles. In fact, paleontologists found a Kronosaurus stomach fossil containing a giant sea turtle that it had swallowed whole and suffocated. Kronosaurus jaws were truly powerful tools. Bite force studies estimate it could pack one of the strongest bites of any animal, on par with or slightly above a T-Rex. Mosasaurus, by contrast, had many sharp slicing teeth. They were curved and blade-like, perfect for slashing flesh. Mosasaurus jaws were also very flexible. They had extra joints that could open its mouth wider than a crocodile's, kind of a double-hinged jaw, so it could swallow large prey. A typical Mosasaurus might grab a fish or turtle in its jaws and shake or slice it. Its bite force was powerful, but not quite as bone-crushing strong as Kronosaurus's. In fact, one source notes that Mosasaurus had sharper teeth, while Kronosaurus had the higher bite force. The shape of the head is telling too. Kronosaurus's skull was short and stubby, almost like a giant rock with teeth. Mosasaurus's skull was longer and more tapered, resembling a crocodile's snout with extra length. This gave Mosasaurus a bit more reach to snap at prey. Combined with the tail fin and muscular body, Mosasaurus could accelerate and lunge at prey in open water, whereas Kronosaurus may have relied on crushing power in perhaps somewhat shallower or more restricted waters. Habitat and time. Even their homes in the Cretaceous seas were different. Kronosaurus fossils had been found mainly in the Great Artesian Basin of Australia, and a few in Colombia. Back then, this area was covered by the Eromanga Sea, a shallow inland sea that stretched across much of what is now Australia. The water there was relatively shallow and surprisingly quite cool, almost near freezing in parts. Kronosaurus was the apex predator of those murky waters. It swam among ammonite scallop reefs, cephalopods, fish, and even other plesiosaurs, preying on turtles and plesiosaur necks, as we saw in fossils. Mosasaurus, in contrast, lived in wide-open oceans and seaways around the world. Its fossils have been found on every continent except, so far, Australia. During the late Cretaceous, there were big seaways like the Western Interior Seaway in North America, the Tethys Sea between continents, and vast Atlantic waters. Mosasaurus turned up in all of them. This means it experienced a variety of climates from tropical to cooler waters. It coexisted with other mosasaurs, sharks, turtles, and early seabirds. Unlike Kronosaurus, which hunted mainly the waters of one region, Mosasaurus was a truly global hunter. Time-wise, they were separated by millions of years. Kronosaurus prowled in the Aptian-Albian stages, about 125 to 100 million years ago. Mosasaurs didn't show up until the Campanian and Maastrichtian, about 82 to 66 million years ago. That's like living in different chapters of Earth's history book. When Kronosaurus was alive, dinosaurs like Iguanodon and Spinosaurids roamed the land nearby. By the time Mosasaurus swam around, dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops were walking on land. Diet and lifestyle. What did these big mega-predators eat? Both were carnivores, but their menus had some differences. Kronosaurus seems to have loved soft-bodied and shellfish prey. The fossils above tell a story. One Kronosaurus specimen had a whole big turtle in its stomach. Another fossil, an elasmosaurid plesiosaur, had Kronosaurus bite marks on its neck bones, suggesting Kronosaurus hunted long-necked plesiosaurs and bit through their necks. In short, turtles, ammonites, and other plesiosaurs were on the menu. Its powerful neck and jaws likely allowed it to grab moving prey from below. Kronosaurus might have been a bit like a crocodile of the sea, possibly sneaking up from beneath or ambushing fish and other reptiles. Interestingly, evidence even suggests that Kronosaurus adults might have attacked juveniles of its own kind, cannibalism, since a smaller Kronosaurus skull showed big bite wounds from another Kronosaurus. Yikes! Family feuds. Mosasaurus had a wider menu. With its larger range and powerful slicing teeth, it could eat almost anything in the water. Fossils indicate it likely ate bony fish, sharks, squid, cephalopods, sea turtles, and even other mosasaurs. One fossil even shows it eating a plesiosaur calovectes. Mosasaurus likely hunted near the surface and in open water, lunging after prey like a giant water lizard. In some places where a Mosasaurus arrived, like in North America's western interior seaway, the whole ecosystem seems to have shifted around it. That's how top predator it was. It even competed with other big mosasaurs like Tylosaurus and Prognathodon, but they likely ate different things so they could all survive together. As hunters, they each had strengths. Kronosaurus was likely a slow-burn ambush predator using brute force and surprise attack. Think big head slamming down on prey. Mosasaurus might have been more agile and intelligent, capable of chasing fast prey and ambushing near the surface. In fact, some scientists suggest Mosasaurus was quite smart for a reptile, able to outthink prey, whereas Kronosaurus relied on sheer size and power. What was the difference between Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus? When we think about Kronosaurus and Mosasaurus, it's tempting to lump them together as giant sea monsters. But in reality, they weren't just separated by time and distance. They represented two very different ocean worlds. For Kronosaurus, the world was smaller, warmer, and filled with shallow inland seas. Imagine a vast tropical lagoon stretching across Australia, filled with giant turtles, plesiosaurs, and shoals of fish. Kronosaurus was the apex enforcer of that environment, ruling over a more confined, crowded ecosystem. Its shorter, bulkier build made sense here. It didn't need to chase prey across open oceans, but rather ambush it in tighter, reef-like spaces. Mosasaurus, by contrast, swam in oceans that looked much closer to our modern seas. Wide, deep, and teeming with everything from sharks to squid to seabirds, these were ecosystems with far greater variety and scale. To thrive here, Mosasaurus had to be flexible, faster, more maneuverable, and willing to eat almost anything. Where Kronosaurus was a specialist bruiser, Mosasaurus was a generalist overlord. There's also a fascinating contrast to their ecological impact. Kronosaurus likely shaped its world by targeting medium to large marine reptiles, keeping populations in check and influencing the survival of turtle and plesiosaur species. Mosasaurus, on the other hand, may have been so dominant that it essentially reset entire food chains. Evidence suggests smaller mosasaurs avoided areas where giants like Mosasaurus prowled, while birds and early marine mammals had to adapt strategies to avoid being wiped out. In a way, Mosasaurus wasn't just a predator, it was an ecosystem engineer. And then there's the mystery of survival. Why did Kronosaurus vanish tens of millions of years before Mosasaurus even appeared? The answer may lie in their differences. Kronosaurus's body plan, perfect for shallow seas, may have doomed it when environments shifted and inland seas dried up. Mosasaurus, with its versatile design, fit into the wide-open oceans that expanded later in the Cretaceous. It was almost like Kronosaurus was built for a limited stage, while Mosasaurus arrived with the right tools at the right time to dominate the world stage. In the end, Mosasaurus was the bigger, lengthwise predator with sharper teeth and more global range, while Kronosaurus was slightly shorter and bulkier with a brutally powerful bite tuned for crushing. Both were fearsome top predators of their time. It's a bit like comparing a crocodile to a great white shark in mythical form. Each had its own style of terror. So, next time you watch a Mosasaurus in a movie, hello Jurassic World fans, or flip through a dinosaur book, remember, Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus were cousins in sea monster duty, but they hunted in different eras and with a different swagger. One wore the crown in the late Cretaceous oceans, the other reigned in the early Cretaceous seas. And that's the ocean-sized difference between them. What was the difference between Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis? Have you ever imagined a creature as tall as a giraffe suddenly taking to the sky? Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis were exactly those kinds of giants. One was a huge flying reptile from the age of dinosaurs, and the other was the biggest flying bird that ever lived. They both ruled the skies in their time, but they were very different from each other. What made them so special? Which one was bigger, and which one was more like the birds we see today? Stay with us, because we're about to explore the amazing differences and a few similarities between Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis. Get ready for a sky-high adventure into the prehistoric world of giant flyers, a world where dragons almost seemed real and eagles looked tiny in comparison. Meet Quetzalcoatlus, the giant reptile of the skies. Quetzalcoatlus was not a bird at all. It was a type of flying reptile called a pterosaur. In fact, it was one of the largest animals ever to fly. Quetzalcoatlus lived about 68 to 66 million years ago, at the very end of the Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs like T-Rex were alive. Its name comes from Quetzalcoatl, an Aztec feathered serpent god, and Quetzalcoatlus was certainly godlike in size. Just how big was it? Enormous. With wings that stretched around 33 to 36 feet from tip to tip, Quetzalcoatlus's wingspan was about as wide as a small airplane's wings. Imagine looking up at a flying creature that tall. It would be like seeing a giraffe with wings. Its weight is harder to know for sure. Scientists have only found a few bones, but some estimate it might have weighed on the order of 440 to 550 pounds, as heavy as a large lion. Even conservative estimates say it was at least as heavy as a big adult human. Yet, thanks to hollow bones, it wasn't too heavy to fly. Quetzalcoatlus had a long pointed beak with no teeth and a very long neck. Its body was covered with hair-like fuzz, not feathers, and its wings were made of skin membranes stretched over a large fourth finger on each arm, similar to a bat's wing, but on a much larger scale. In the air, Quetzalcoatlus was likely a master of gliding. It would launch itself into the air with a powerful leap and then soar on wind currents. Scientists think Quetzalcoatlus flew fast, perhaps up to 75 miles per hour, and could travel long distances once it got up high. On land, Quetzalcoatlus might surprise you. It wasn't clumsy at all. Fossil footprints show it walked on all fours, using its wing arms as front legs. It could have hunted by stalking small animals, maybe snatching up little dinosaurs, lizards, or baby crocodiles in its long beak. Meet Argentavis, the giant bird of the skies. Now, let's travel forward in time about 6 million years ago. The dinosaurs and Quetzalcoatlus have long vanished. In South America, another flyer holds the record for size, Argentavis magnificans, the largest flying bird ever discovered. Argentavis lived in the late Miocene epoch, around 6 to 8 million years ago, in what is now Argentina. That's how it got its name. If Quetzalcoatlus was like a dragon in the dinosaur age, Argentavis was like a super-sized eagle of a later era. Argentavis looked much more familiar to us than Quetzalcoatlus did because Argentavis was essentially a giant vulture or condor-like bird. It had feathers, a beak, and flew by flapping and gliding with its mighty wings. How big was Argentavis? Its wingspan is estimated at about 23 feet. Picture a wingspan that could cover the length of a bus. That's Argentavis. Its wings weren't as big as Quetzalcoatlus's, but for a bird, they were huge. On the ground, Argentavis stood about 5 to 6.5 feet tall, roughly the height of a person. So, while a human could look an Argentavis in the eye on land, Quetzalcoatlus would have towered way above both. In terms of weight, Argentavis is thought to have weighed around 154 to 160 pounds. That's about the weight of an average adult man or maybe a large dog. It's hefty, but notice it's only maybe a quarter of Quetzalcoatlus's mass. Birds have lighter builds, and Argentavis, though huge, was much lighter than the giant pterosaurs. This weight was still a challenge for flying, so Argentavis had to be really smart about how it flew. Argentavis likely lived like today's condors or eagles. Scientists believe it was a glider, not a constant flapper. It probably launched from high cliffs or hills or caught a strong breeze to get airborne. One study suggested Argentavis could have glided up to 200 miles in a day once it got high up in the sky. It wasn't very fast at flapping, but in the right conditions, it might have reached speeds up to 62 miles per hour just by gliding on strong wind. What did Argentavis eat? It probably ate meat. Its lifestyle might have been a mix of hunting and scavenging. Think of a giant condor. It would swoop down to feed on dead animals, carrion, it spotted from the sky, or perhaps snatch small animals on the ground. With a sharp beak and strong claws, Argentavis would likely tear into carcasses or prey. There's even a chance it stole meals from smaller predators, simply because who would argue with a bird that big? When it wasn't flying, Argentavis may have perched on cliffs or walked on the ground looking for food, but it needed open space or wind to take off again. A bird this large couldn't just jump up and start flying from flat ground without a running start or a helpful gust of wind. Quetzalcoatlus versus Argentavis. How they differ? Now that we've met our two sky titans, let's compare them directly. Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis never met in real life, they lived tens of millions of years apart, but it's fun to imagine them side by side. Here's the key differences that set these giants apart. Time period and evolution. Quetzalcoatlus was a reptile from the dinosaur era, late Cretaceous, approximately 70 million years ago. Argentavis was a bird from the much more recent past, late Miocene, approximately 6 million years ago. This means Quetzalcoatluses lived in a world with T-Rex and Triceratops, while Argentavis lived in a world with early wolves, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths. They are separated by about 60 million plus years of evolution. Reptile versus bird. Quetzalcoatlus was a pterosaur, a cousin of dinosaurs, but not a dinosaur itself. It had skin wings and no feathers. Argentavis was a true bird, covered in feathers and with wings like today's birds. So Quetzalcoatlus looked more like a giant bat or dragon, whereas Argentavis looked like an oversized condor or eagle. Size. Both were huge, but Quetzalcoatlus was bigger overall. Quetzalcoatlus's wingspan was nearly twice that of Argentavis. Quetzalcoatlus was also much taller on the ground, and Quetzalcoatlus likely weighed a few times more than Argentavis. Flight style. Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis were both primarily soarers. Neither could flap their wings for long, they relied on wind and thermals. However, Quetzalcoatlus likely could launch itself powerfully into the air with a leap, using its strong arms and legs together, and then glide. Argentavis might have needed a running start or a downhill slope to get enough lift for takeoff. In the air, Argentavis was akin to a modern condor, circling on rising air currents. Quetzalcoatlus, with its immense wings, also probably rode thermals over land. Quetzalcoatlus may have been faster in straight flight, whereas Argentavis was extremely efficient at gliding long distances. Diet and behavior. Quetzalcoatlus likely hunted on land and along water bodies, picking up small animals or fish. It might have behaved like a giant stork or heron, walking and snapping up prey. Argentavis probably scavenged or hunted from the air, more like a giant vulture or eagle scanning the ground. Argentavis had a beak built for ripping flesh, suggesting it ate carrion and possibly prey it could overpower. Quetzalcoatlus's long, toothless beak suggests it could probe and grab prey whole. Location. Quetzalcoatlus fossils were found in Texas, North America, which at the time had wide plains and maybe some shallow waterways, a good environment for a big flyer to launch and hunt. Argentavis fossils are from Argentina, South America, particularly in areas that were open grasslands or foothills of the Andes Mountains. In summary, Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis were two incredible flyers that capture our imagination. Quetzalcoatlus was a reptilian giant from the age of dinosaurs. It was larger, stood taller, and was unlike any bird alive today. Argentavis was the feathered giant that ruled the skies millions of years later, the biggest bird ever, mastering the air like a modern condor on a supersized scale. If you put them head to head, Quetzalcoatlus would dwarf Argentavis in size. It's like comparing a flying giraffe to a flying eagle, albeit an eagle the size of a human. But each was perfectly adapted to its own time and environment. Quetzalcoatlus soared over late Cretaceous landscapes, possibly watching dinosaurs move below. Argentavis glided on warm winds over the Miocene pampas, perhaps spotting ancient mammals down on the ground. Both creatures show how diverse and extreme life on Earth has been. It's amazing to think that at one point, the skies were big enough for such giants. So, next time you see a pigeon or a seagull, remember that their ancient cousins were once the size of airplanes. Quetzalcoatlus and Argentavis were truly one-of-a-kind flyers, each the king of its sky in its own way. And that is the big difference. One was a colossal feathered bird, the other a colossal winged reptile, each dominating the skies in their heyday. Imagine seeing either of them. It would be unforgettable.